Welcome to the Commissioner Corner podcast. This is going to be a special night here. And we made it through Madden 17, guys, and we are here for the Players Hall of Fame induction ceremony. It's going to be a great night. We've got some great names going into the NBL Hall of Fame. If you've been around the NBL a while, you've heard of all the guys that are already in the NBL Players Hall of Fame. Guys like Joey Bell, defensive tackle C.J. Lewis. Going back even further, you got my boy Trent Redmond. You've got Etney Asante, Eric Payne, Sir Jordan. Tons of guys that have etched their name in NBL history forever. Just playing absolutely great football and being studs in the league for a long time. Before we get to that, though, I just want to touch on something real quick. You guys know that we have the EA Access tournament coming up this week, just in a couple days. That's going to be kicking off Thursday, and you're going to want to be right here for the entire thing. We have an incredible live stream going on. It's going to be starting off at 11 in the morning, and we're not finishing until 11 at night. We're going to be going 12 hours. I believe OSU and I will be on the call to start, and then you'll be seeing all of your favorite guys. OSU, Sonny, myself, everybody is going to be on the call for that 12-hour stream, and we're going to be going right into the weekend. EA Access. It's going to be a great time. Going to get to test out the game, going to get to play, and have a ton of fun. If you're in the tournament and you still need to refresh on some of the rules, we have a video up on our network that you can check out. Also, you're in the tournament, so you're in the chat. Just message myself, OSU, or Bomber, and whatever questions you have will be answered. So we're going to run over and check the chat real quick. I see our mods here, Deca and Porter. How's it going, guys? Good turnout tonight. We're going to get into the Hall of Fame here with a guy that won the hearts of a lot of people around the NBL. This guy was one of the best players in terms of a position that really doesn't see a whole lot of value throughout the whole year. Now, for this position, only 4 people were considered, and this guy set himself way above and beyond the other guys, and that is going to be halfback Leyland Alston of the New Orleans Saints. Alston was an MVP and just one of the best halfbacks that I have ever seen come through the NBL in all of our history. Season 21 MVP, nearly 6,000 rushing yards for his career, a 4-time All-Pro, 63 career touchdowns, and this guy was just a guy that you could put in your backfield and rely on all year long. Over 1,000 yards, 4 straight years, over 10 touchdowns all of those years. Had a little bit of a down year due to injury his final season, but you cannot deny that he was one of the most elite superstars, for his speed and size and just everything. Bananas was actually the owner for him, and those two had a great relationship throughout their time. Moving on, we're going to be talking about 2 guys from one team and another guy from a different team. But these 2 guys here, I can't tell you how impressive both of these guys were, because whenever we look at criteria for how you're even eligible for the Players Hall of Fame, we want to look at your total stats and your consistency throughout each year that you've played. And these 2 guys right here nail that definition, exactly what you look for. But we're going to start off with the most dominant of the 2, and that is Detroit Lions wide receiver number 84, Whistler Ridgeway. Like I said, consistency is one of the biggest things about being a Hall of Famer. Can you be a star for your entire career? As a rookie, he came in just under 800 yards and only 3 touchdowns, but after that point, he was an elite wide receiver, possibly even the best wide receiver in NBL this cycle. Over 1,000 yards for 5 straight seasons and 12 or more touchdowns in those seasons. Let me just read off the touchdowns that this guy had. after his rookie year and through the end of his career. 13, 14, 12, 15, and 13. That is incredible. And even more so, 75 touchdowns, 7,300 yards, a 5-time All-Pro, 5-time NFC Best Wide Receiver, and of course, the two most important things was the 2-time Super Bowl champion, Whistler Ridgeway, for the Detroit Lions. So another guy here that we're looking at, not too far away from Whistler Ridgeway, but just good enough to be a Hall of Famer. We're moving on to another Detroit Lions wide receiver, and that is number 11, Gilbert DeGeer. Now, this guy was not quite as good as Whistler Ridgeway, but he was still extremely good. All of the consistent numbers that you look for, over 1,000 yards each season, 7 or more touchdowns in every season. His final season, due to injury, he just fell shy of 1,000 yards, by 150 yards, but still such incredible numbers and postseason success that he had to live on in NBL history forever. Not quite as great as Whistler Ridgeway, but the big thing about Gilbert DeGeer is that he was a number 2 wide receiver for his entire career. So for him to do this, he was putting up stats that any number 1 would be very happy to have as a number 2. You're looking at 45 career touchdowns, over 5,300 yards receiving, another 5-time All-Pro, and once again, 2-time NBL Super Bowl champion, Gilbert DeGeer, going up in the NBL Players Hall of Fame right next to Whistler Ridgeway. Possibly the most dynamic wide receiver duo in NBL history. I cannot ever name another duo that to put up that amount of yards together, especially Gilbert DeGeer at number 2. I promised you there was 2 guys from the same team, and now we're going to get to one guy from a different team. And this guy flew under the radar quite a bit. I don't think anybody's really expecting him to be here, but he is another guy that fits exactly what you want whenever you talk about the Players Hall of Fame. The consistency and being a number 1 player for his entire career. And that's going to be the Denver Broncos wide receiver, Tavon Whitlock. Once again, I say, flew under the radar a little bit here, kind of caught some people by surprise, but over 1,000 yards every season that he played. 7 or more touchdowns in every season except one, had one down year of 5, but still very good totals throughout his career, averaged over 1,000 yards every season. A 2-time All-Pro, over 30 touchdowns in his 4 years of experience. His career was very short, but I know that Porter loved the guy, and just one of the definitions of consistency here on a smaller scale, not quite Whistler Ridgeway, but still an extremely talented wide receiver. So we've gotten through some of the flashier positions, some halfbacks, some wide receivers. But now we're going to talk about a guy who probably nobody would even expect to be on any kind of list, Players Hall of Fame or Top 25. But I'm going to tell you this, he made it on both. And this guy might be one of the most impressive players for an entire Madden cycle period. I know that this might not be what everybody would expect. Somebody wants a quarterback, somebody wants a corner, wide receiver, but we're going to be talking about another guy. This guy's on the NBL Top 25 players, and that is Falcons left tackle Zabadi Traylor. This guy, if you looked at all of the offensive linemen, the absolute best sacks allowed per game over their career was right around 0.12 sacks per game. But I'll tell you that everybody else was at either a guard, a center, a left guard or a right guard or a center that was just allowing those sacks. And they don't get that kind of outside pressure that a left tackle would. Even the right tackle position is going to see less than the left tackle. Left tackle's got to be your pass protector. And Zabadi Traylor came in, started over 92 games, and only allowed 11 sacks in his entire career. And that's extremely impressive considering that the New Orleans Saints brought in Bud Dupree down there to try to get some pass rush going. So for a left tackle to come in and be such a dominant guy, started every game, 3-time All-Pro, 2-time best offensive lineman, and of course Super Bowl champion, one of the best players as far as being good at your position, Falcons left tackle Zabadi Traylor. We skipped over some tight ends just because none of them were as good as we thought. A lot of people, tight end wasn't really that big this year. It didn't really seem like tight end was either a target or got open as much, but tight end was not really a dominant thing. But whenever we want to talk about dominance, we're switching over to the defensive side of the football. And these next two guys are elite. I mean, as elite as you can imagine. And we're starting this elite, dominant defensive side of the ball off with Buffalo Bills defensive end Chantrell Bigham. Here is another guy that was just absolutely dominant every single game and a true Hall of Famer. Now, the interesting thing is Justin Basson is was the owner of the Bills, and even previously before, he had a guy named Eric Payne who was the most dominant defensive lineman in NBL history. He is an NBL Players Hall of Fame member. So Justin goes out and gets another guy, Chantrell Bigham, brings him in, averages over 10 sacks a season. The guy was an absolute monster in the pass rush game. Over 60 career sacks. The season 24 best defensive lineman, a 4-time All-Pro, and nearly 300 tackles just by himself. This is an elite pass rusher, and not quite as good as Eric Payne, but possibly number 2 of the pass rushers in NBL history. So moving on, we got our second defensive lineman here, and another guy who was extremely dominant in the postseason, another Detroit Lion. We're going this time to defensive end LaMarcus Callaway. LaMarcus Callaway was not supposed to be a top defensive player. He wasn't supposed to be an incredible pass rusher, but he came in and he did something that was very impressive. Over 4 seasons, he averaged 10 sacks a season, totaling over 40 sacks for his career. A 2-time All-Pro, almost 200 tackles by himself, and remember, that's just in 4 years. And of course, the 2-time NBL Super Bowl champion. This guy is really underrated. Not a whole lot of people talked about him, but whenever the Lions were on the defensive side of the ball, you just saw this large human being flailing around, getting around tackles, and going in after the quarterback. Don't really have the stats for his playoffs, but 2-time NBL champion, one of the best to ever do it. Just such a good player, and really good for the NBL Detroit Lions on the defensive side of the ball. So the next guy that we're moving into is going to be not a dominant guy, but an absolute leader. When you talk about leadership, whenever you think of each side of the ball, offense you think quarterback, defensive side you think middle linebacker. This is going to be one of the most talked about linebacker groups for a long time, and that's the Washington Redskins linebackers that Gubb created. There's 3 of them, and they are just absolute monsters. We couldn't put them all in, but the leader, the most dominant guy on that defense, we're going with Deontay Carty, middle linebacker for the Washington Redskins. Now, everybody knows recent NBL history. You go back, he was a Super Bowl champion just a few seasons ago, actually just two seasons ago. And of course, whenever this guy broke into the league, he was the season 20 Defensive Rookie of the Year, almost 400 tackles by himself, forcing fumbles every year, and of course 25 interceptions and 8 touchdowns as a middle linebacker is extremely impressive. And whenever you look at guys who have really made an impact on the game and really deserve to be members of this Hall of Fame. You want to look at guys who are leaders and are extremely productive on the field, and this guy is really the guy that I would say could be the face of NBL Players Hall of Fame because of that. You know, he talked a good game, but he also backed it up, got his team to an NBL Super Bowl. And that's exactly what we want out of these guys. And it's a very impressive career for Deontay Carty. So moving on, we're gonna talk about a couple guys here that I've had to deal with personally, and I strongly dislike, but their production on the field, you cannot deny it. First guy that we're going to be talking about, I know that Star loves him. That's Julius Way, cornerback for the Tennessee Titans. Now, I personally believe that this guy had the best man coverage of any corner that I've ever seen in my entire career in NBL. I cannot tell you how many times this guy ran the route before a wide receiver. He is absolutely one of the best corners I've ever seen, probably the best, but he deserves it because in season 21 he was the best defensive back, over 25 career interceptions, a two-time All-Pro. And what really stands out about this guy is his not just his interceptions, but his ability to get in there and deflect the pass, break up the pass before he can get to the wide receiver. He led all of the cornerbacks and even all of the safeties with pass deflections of 36 over his career, which doesn't sound like a lot, but depending on what they do or do not count, he was one of the absolute best at just keeping the ball away from wide receivers. Wasn't extremely productive in returning the ball back for touchdowns. We've got two other guys who have taken that role, but Julius Way, an absolute stud in the secondary for the Tennessee Titans. So as I talked about, I personally had to deal with Julius Way a few times. Another guy I really had to deal with was one of the better corners as far as overall and actual ability and what he can do on the field at all times. He was good in the press game. He was good covering deep. He was good running with receivers. And I got tons of stories about this guy, but he absolutely deserved to be in the NBL Players Hall of Fame. And that's going to be Cincinnati Bengals cornerback Tani Iwabima. Such a secondary needed a good young guy to come in and be a leader for their defense. And Tani Iwabima was that guy. He came in 4 seasons ago whenever the Bengals were kind of transitioning between the secondary that they had now, or they had then, and what they have now, which is a very good secondary led by Tani Iwabima. And it started off with him doing great things. He was the season 24 best defensive back. Wasn't the biggest guy in turnovers. He only had 20 interceptions, but he was another monster in the pass deflection game. Not quite as good as Julius Way, but he nearly had double-digit deflections each year of his career. And he only got to play 4 years, so we only got to see him be dominant for a short period of time. But in those 4 years, he almost averaged double-digit deflections each time. And that is something very important to consider because just interceptions doesn't cut it. If you can knock the ball away or keep the ball from getting to that receiver, that's still an extremely good career. And he had such a good career with the Bengals. And he also returned over 6 touchdowns six interceptions, 4 touchdowns during his 4 years as a Cincinnati Bengal, that he had to be in the NBL Players Hall of Fame because he really did it all. It wasn't a guy that you could just look at and say, that's a pick guy, that's a deflection guy, that's a touchdown guy. He actually really did it all and was one of the best players to ever come into the secondary of any NBL team. And now we've talked about 2 cornerbacks. We're getting into the final guy of the NBL Players Hall of Fame. And this guy, I know nobody had any idea who he was. He is one of the most completely ignored, possibly, guys in the entire NBL. But his stats, if you put these stats up next to anybody else that's in here, Julius Way or Tani Iwabima, you would say, wow, that guy definitely deserves to be there. But you would have never saw it throughout the year just because nobody really talked about it. It was never something that was picked up. But he was out there grinding, being a productive shutdown corner his entire career. And he had a long career, so that's extremely impressive. And that is going to be the Oakland Raiders cornerback, Corey Roth. A very, very under-the-radar kind of guy, but such a great career for him. Over 350 tackles, 25 career interceptions. One-time All-Pro, but he played much bigger than that. Nearly 400 tackles by himself. But another thing that was extremely impressive for this guy was that he had that ability to pick the ball off and take it to the house. 8 interceptions returned for touchdowns over his career. And that is something that the Raiders really love to have, because whenever you get the ball on defense, it's, you can either start a drive, or you can just have your guy take it back for a touchdown. And that's exactly what this guy did. He did that specific thing better than anybody else. Another pass deflection machine. Not quite as good as Tani Iwabima, but still an incredible defensive back. And he is now a player that will live forever in the NBL Players Hall of Fame. I'm going to jump over to the chat real quick. I see Tyler Porter says Nick Beekman. I just wanted to throw out there that the safety position had so many guys that were very, very good. They all had great stats, but there was so many of them that it just seemed like they all kind of produced at the same level, and nobody really stood out. I think there was about 7 or 8 guys that all were kind of around the same area, so that was just kind of like a baseline production for the safety position, and nobody really stood out. So there's going to be tons of snubs that people are going to be talking about. This guy should have made it, this guy shouldn't have made it, and I'm excited to see that. We have a great community here, and it's everybody wants their guy in there, and not even if it's their guy, if it's a guy that they really enjoyed to watch. We have tons of NBL live shows where these players made their mark here, made their careers playing in the NBL. So whenever you watch those guys all cycle long and you see them not make the list, or a guy that surprised you on the list, it's just one of those things that you want to talk about, and that's just how it is. But I would like to congratulate all of the owners who drafted very well, played very well, to get a guy inducted into the NBL Players Hall of Fame. And before we go here, I just want to give out a huge, absolute huge shout out to our NBL Network graphics guy, Kyle. I can't thank you enough for these graphics. They were completely above and beyond what I ever thought that we would be able to come up with. You absolutely killed it. I want to give a huge shout out to you and thank you so much for doing what you do, not only for this show, but the entire network itself. And that's all we got for today, fellas. The NBL Players Hall of Fame class is out there. They'll be released on Twitter and on the 365 site. You'll get to go check them out there. Those awesome player cards will be out there that Kyle's made. And leave in the comments, tweet it out. I want to hear who got snubbed. I really want to talk about it. And I want to hear you guys' thoughts about who should have made it, who got snubbed, and who really is on that list that really caught you off guard. I want to hear about it. So I want to thank you guys for coming out to the show, and have a good night, and get ready for that EA Access tournament. It's coming Thursday. Let's go.